This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. On this episode, we welcome Rich Villodas, the Brooklyn-born lead pastor of New Life Fellowship, a large multiracial church in Queens. His first book, The Deeply Formed Life, is now available wherever books are sold.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever and wherever you may be listening, we welcome you back to another edition of the Vickers Crossing podcast. The Vickers Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And we are back again with another great guest that we're going to be introducing you to in just a little bit. Pastor, author, podcaster, speaker, Rich Villodas will be joining us here at the Vickers Crossing. My name is Rob Henderson, and I'm the priest at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's in London.
Yes, sir. I'm Vicar number 2 here, Kevin George. I'm at St. Aidan's Church in Northwest London, where I hang out with the dude who's here.
That's me. My name is Ian. I'm a singer-songwriter, and I produce this amongst a lot of other things.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
He's a productive guy. Today, when we got him,
Yes.
Robbie seemed like he was in about 4 different places when we got him today.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? His cell phone was going, his thumbs were going crazy. It's like
He's juggling a lot, our man. Yeah,
I don't know what's going on.
It's coming to the end of the school year, right, Ian?
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
We've got another month or so to go, right? So
Yeah,
this is
just
crunch time.
Yeah, a month from now will be exam season probably. So
Wow.
not only do I have a lot of things to plan for that, but also before that and after that and in between that and around that.
Wowzers,
Right,
man. You got a lot going on.
Yeah.
Lots going on.
Well, as busy as he is, we're going to have to get on with things and acknowledge the land that we are upon here today, as we're wont to do around here. The Vickers Crossing acknowledges that our podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenaweapuck, and Attawandaron peoples on the lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of this land and vital contributors to our society. One of the things this book talks about, that we're going to talk about, the deeply formed life that Rich Villodas writes, one of the things he writes very well about in here is reconciliation. And it's certainly work that we all have ahead of us.
Good. I also want to say hello and thank you to our sponsors here at the Vickers Crossing, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. Many thanks to Dave Mullen and his staff at A. Miller George.
Thank you, Dave, and giving our thanks as well for Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved, a fantastic owner and pharmacist named Carol Basada, and we send our love and thanksgiving to her as well.
And last but certainly not least, we want to send a special thank you to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And many, many thank yous to Trisha Lister for that one and hooking us up with that. So,
all right, good.
Yo, Trisha,
So-
thanks, man.
So our listeners today are listening to this podcast. It's probably past the 20th or 21st of March.
21st, yep.
But we are recording today on St. Patty's Day.
Top of the morning.
Little old.
Oh, yeah.
So therein lies the green.
Yeah,
Because I know everybody's wondering, I wonder why Rob's wearing green. And
Yeah.
I wonder why he's drinking his coffee from this green mug.
Well, I have on a green shirt and I've got Celtic Daily Prayer right in front of me. How do you like that?
There you
is your
go.
shirt green or is it blue?
It's green. I don't know why it's coming up as blue, but
Okay.
it is green. It is green.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. My wall is green.
Yeah.
That's true. Got the green wall.
That's fair.
That's good too. Now, usually we might be out celebrating St. Patty's Day in some style of which many do. A lot of people aren't doing that, of course, with the pandemic and the lockdown.
We'd
heard
be
of that.
Well, we'd be drinking writer's tears.
Right, Raiders tears.
Yes.
But in commemoration of that, and just to give ourselves a chance to be together and have a laugh, because
Yeah.
I always find St. Patty's Day a wonderful day just to gather and laugh and have some joy and fun. I thought I'd give you my best Irish joke.
Okay.
You ready that today?
All right.
Yeah.
Let's have it.
So this is it today.
Okay. Here we go.
So-
Ready, folks?
Here we go. Two gentlemen sitting at a bar one night. One looks down to the other and says, "You know, I got the feeling you might be from Ireland." And the other guy says, "Well, as a matter of fact, I am." He says, "Where are you from?" He says, "I'm from Dublin." He says, "Well, I'm from Dublin." And he says, Where did you grow up?" And the second guy says, "Oh, I grew up on a little street named McCleary Street." And the guy says, "Well, isn't that something? I grew up on McCleary Street." He said, "Where'd you go to school?" And the second guy says, "Well, I went to school at St. Mary's Catholic Boys School." And the other guy says, "As a matter of fact, that's where I went to school." This is incredible. He said, "When did you graduate?" He says, "I think I graduated in 1983. He says, "Well, the Lord is shining down upon us today. I graduated in 1983 too. Isn't it amazing that we'd find each other here today on this special day together?" And just at that point, the bartender walked over into the corner and said to the waitress, "Oh, this is going to be a long night." And the waitress said, "Why?" He says, "Oh, the Murphy twins are drunk again."
Put them. Sure, put a rim roll in there, Ian.
Well, happy St.
Wow.
Patty's Day, everybody.
Amen
Wow.
to that. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, time for us to play our favorite game show here in the Vickers Crossing. This is a little game we like to call.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
It's not a lie if you believe it, guys. Did you
It's
know?
not
that?
a lie if you
My
believe
friends,
it.
that's George Costanza. What's this all about, Rob?
Well, we want to tell a story, one of us, and leave it to the other two to figure out if that person is lying or telling the truth.
Okay, all
So a
right.
little story about ourselves,
Yeah,
a little buffoonery, if you will.
yeah.
And I think it's Ian's turn.
You know it is, and I
It
have a
could be.
wonderful one.
It could be buffoonery or it could be gospel.
Ooh,
Could be,
absolutely. Well,
right?
you gentlemen know that I'm an avid singer-songwriter. You're
Yes.
well aware of this.
Of
Now,
course.
what you may not know is how it started.
Hmm.
So I would like to tell you, paint you a picture, if you will. It
Sure.
could be a lie. It could be. It's not a lie if you believe it, though.
That's
Sure.
right.
And I would like to tell you that the reason I started writing songs is because, and you've heard this before, or have you? It's because I wanted to impress a girl, and she eventually turned me down.
Mm.
And the first song I wrote was for her, and she said no.
I have a hard time believing any woman would turn Ian down.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rob? I mean,
Well,
I
although we've done-
I got turned down quite a lot. Now that may surprise you.
Yeah, I used to call it Tuesdays.
Yeah.
No, we did some things when we were young men that to ensure that the one we were pining for would notice us.
Mhm.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Ian would decide to write a song. And what can I ask one question? What was the girl's name?
For privacy's sake, I will call her
Okay.
Anne.
And,
Anne.
okay.
All right, Anne.
I think this is malarkey, as Joe Biden
Yeah.
would say. I think not. I have a hard time thinking that if he wrote of the songs of his I've heard, which are all beautiful,
Thank
I
you.
can't imagine him presenting a beautiful song like one of those to a girl and
Mm.
being the charmer that he is, and she looking into his face, his beautiful dog puppy eyes, and saying, "No, I'm not interested."
Yeah.
So I think it's malarkey.
Okay. I'm going to go. I'll say, I think there's some truth to this. I think Ian, from what I've heard in his music and getting to know him, is a really good writer. He uses wonderful metaphor. I think he could construct a song that maybe wasn't kind of a sappy love song, but got a sense of how he was feeling about someone, to put it in a nice place like that for them. So I'd say it's possible. So Ian, I believe you.
Mm. Well, it is malarkey. It is not true. I did write plenty of songs, but never once did I go, "This song's for you," and get turned down from it.
All right.
I never
Well,
been like, "This
yeah.
song is about this."
For what it's worth, I mean, I'm not exactly like Ann Landers or whatever, whoever does these things, but I gotta say to you, like, I mean, I think this is really good sort of technique. Like, I think that if you are searching out a soulmate, then I think to present one of your beautiful pieces of music to a potential suitor, uh, and you put that puppy dog look you just have on your face right now on, I just don't see you getting turned down. That's just
Well,
me.
thank
Ian,
you.
a little advice, eh?
Yeah.
Giant Tiger sells mushy cards for $1. Just saying.
So here's the deal. Ask your mom about this rather than me or
Mm.
Rob, okay?
Yeah, that's probably
Yes,
We're not the
because
ones.
plenty of advice is provided
Well,
here.
we're not the people you should be listening to.
Well, we should be listening to our guest because
Yes,
point.
absolutely.
Rich has a lot to say. So let's bring in Rich Velotis into the Vickers Crossing. And here he is. Rich Velotis is joining us on the Vickers Crossing podcast. Rich, we welcome you today. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for the kind invitation. I look forward to a good conversation with you.
All right, it's good. It's good to have you here. Whereabouts are you for our listeners? You can tell us where you reside. And
I'm in Queens, New York City. Queens,
Right.
New York City, with about 2.2 million other people in this borough.
wow, that's something.
Good old
That
New
is
York,
something.
right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I was in New York on a vacation some time ago, a long time ago, and loved it. Loved my week there. I mean, what a great city. And
Yeah.
but haven't been back. We went on when we were there. I was in radio school, and I told the guys this story. I ended up on the Howard Stern show. Can you believe that?
Is that right?
Yeah, that's a weird. That's a lot. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I was just having these flashbacks of going into the studio. We didn't know where we were going. We were touring studios, and we're going up the elevator and walk in. There's Howard Stern. It's just
crazy.
bizarre. Yeah.
Now,
So anyway.
did I pick up in the book somewhere you had a background in radio, Rich?
No, definitely
I don't
not.
know.
Okay.
We just had a guest yesterday who's like royalty in radio here in Canada. She's retired now, named Erin Davis, and maybe I'm getting up. I've chewed through 2 books since Sunday, so I could have the details mixed up.
Yeah, no. I listen to a lot of the radio,
Okay.
but that's as
Yeah,
far
yeah.
as it goes for me.
Well, look, we're glad you're with us and that you've taken time in Queens today to be with us. You're in such an incredibly interesting place. And I guess that's really where I want to begin. About 20% or so of our listeners are from the United States, but most of our listeners are here in Canada and may not know as much about your context as those of us who've picked up and read your really great book. So I wonder if you could share a little bit. Your bio says that you're Brooklyn born and the lead pastor of New Life Fellowship in Queens. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about New Life, because reading about it in the book, it really sounds like an incredible place. I went on with your webpage and your sermons and so on. Fantastic stuff. And your own journey with that community and your own sense of how you came into that in terms of being a pastor.
Yeah, New Life started in 1987. It was started by a guy named Pete Scazzaro, who some folks probably know. He's written a number of books about emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy leader. And so he planted it in 1987, started a Bible study in a local hospital for a few medical professionals. And next thing you know, the Bible study grew and grew and grew. And really a church was birthed out of it. And Pete led that church for 26 years. And when I got to New Life in 2008, I joined the team to be part of their preaching team, to oversee small group ministry, not knowing that a couple of years later, they would enter into a succession plan. And Pete would step down from his position. And they asked me to, if I would be willing to go through a 3-year process with them to succeed him. And so I did that in 2013, became the lead pastor of New Life, which is a beautiful congregation. We are in the center of Queens in a neighborhood called Elmhurst. National Geographic has called our neighborhood at one point the most diverse zip code in the world.
Wow.
123 languages spoken in the neighborhood. We have 75 nations represented in our church. Our church is anywhere, who knows in a pandemic who's left here, but
I know.
I haven't seen them in a while. I don't know who's left.
We're all in that boat.
Yeah. But I'd say, between 1,800 and 2,000 people are part of our community, and from over 75 nations. And our diversity is not just marked by, ethnic diversity. It's generational diversity, socioeconomic diversity, political diversity, theological diversity, and as I've discovered, increasingly so over the past 4 years. And so, yeah, beautiful congregation. Half of Queens is foreign born. So lots of first generation and second generation immigrants from all over the world who are part of our community. And I have just the great pleasure of leading this diverse mosaic of people in the great borough of Queens. So that's a little bit about our context here.
Ooh, go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that's quite a diverse group. When I think about what we do here,
we're white.
Yeah, there's just white people.
We're white.
All this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh.
I mean, I like 175 languages or nationalities. You said, right?
75 nationalities at our church, 123 languages.
123 languages.
Wow, that's
I'm like,
something.
yeah, like I when we are here, I look out and I see all these Anglophiles and look at the three of us on here. I mean, we're pasty white. We're so white. This is something, and you write well about this. We'll talk about this a little later too, but you write well about this in the book about, the racial divisions that enslave us, really, church, all institutions, and the fact that those of us who've benefited from the glorification of white bodies and white people, so I think that diversity is incredible. It just strikes me as wow. And I'm sure it presents a whole ton of challenges, but as I said, I just finished the book, The Deeply Formed Life. And the book is great encouragement for followers on the way of Jesus. If you're out there today and you're thinking, how do I take this a layer down, because sometimes we can hang out on the surface of our journeys. This is a great book to help you get there. You write in the book, I've learned that to be deeply formed requires one to be widely informed, not on a cognitive level alone, but also in a way that the very makeup of our lives is profoundly shaped. I've discovered repeatedly that faithful Christian witness requires us to hold on to the beautiful and the diverse manifestations of God, of God's action among God's people, stretching ourselves to be more faithful than ever to Jesus and his kingdom in the age in which we live. The best way I can illustrate this is through the example of redwood trees. And then you go on in the book to tell a story about being in San Francisco, I think, and about the redwoods. I wonder if you could, using that image, explain to us how you landed on that and why that matters, how that works in this context.
Yeah, Kevin, when I think about the redwood trees and the encounter I had with nature in that moment, it resonated because I think what I'm trying to accomplish in a deeply formed life is to resist what I call formational compartmentalization. By formational compartmentalization, I'm addressing the various ways that we segment and compartmentalize aspects of Christian faith to the exclusion of others. And so for me, I've been profoundly shaped by various streams and traditions. I'm shaped by the Pentecostal charismatic tradition. That's where I became a Christian in, so that 15 family members on one night, I might ask, in August of 1999. Wow. My parents and siblings included in that. I've been impacted by the evangelical tradition. I've been impacted by progressive mainline traditions. And so all of these traditions tend to emphasize some particular aspect of Christian faith and faithfulness to Jesus. What I've discovered, though, is that many do not hold together the other strands. And so in the evangelical tradition, it's often about right thinking. In the Pentecostal charismatic tradition, it's about right experiences. In the progressive mainline traditions, it's often about right engagement in the world in terms of justice, in terms of mercy, in terms of those things. How do we hold those things together? And at the same time, so the breadth of it and the depth of it. How do we have a life that's deeply shaped, deeply contemplative, has a focus on interiority? And so when I went to San Francisco, I had that framework in my mind. And then as I was about to speak for a church retreat out there, surrounded by these remarkable redwood trees. I'm used to skyscrapers. I'm not used
yes,
to
that's right. Yeah.
kind of manifestations of beauty. And the pastor got up and to give a little welcome. And then he said, hey, we're surrounded by beauty and these redwood trees. They have these roots that might not go incredibly deep into the ground, but they're part of a root system that can extend hundreds of feet away from the trunk as they connect themselves to other trees and other roots, which is why they're able to grow so high into the air. And when he said that, I kind of like, I was in another world for that moment because I was thinking about this book, and I thought that's the image that I think we need for our generation, and that's the image that I need for this book. I want to have the values and the streams and the traditions. I want those things to be held together because we need all that we can get to live faithfully to Jesus in this world. So that essentially was the image and how it came about and why I write about it in the introduction.
It's an incredible image when you think about it. I mean, it's all enmeshed, and some of the people we've had on here lately, like when Brian McLaren was on, for instance, he was talking about a similar thing in terms of we have so much richness in Christian tradition that and it's diverse. But when we silo ourselves away from one another with all of that, we lose something, right? So taking all those influences together is a way of holding up a tree that can stand like 300 or 400 feet.
Yeah.
It's an amazing image, right?
Yeah. And McLaren was, when I read Generous Orthodoxy.
Yeah, Generous Orthodoxy.
And he had the book with the longest subtitle you'll ever see.
Yes, true.
Why I am this and that and that and this and this. And that. But that was a significant part of my own formation, thinking, I just don't want to draw out of my own tribe. I want to learn from the historic and global witness of the church.
Right. One of the things in the book is talk about being deeply formed, that there are 5 values in which we need to be deeply formed. And I wanted to take a look at one of them. We can't go through all of them in our time today, but just to list them for folks. There's contemplative rhythms for an exhausted life, racial reconciliation for a divided world, interior examination for a world living on the surface, sexual wholeness for a culture that splits bodies from souls, and missional presence for distracted and disengaged people. The one I wanted to look at today, Rich, if we could, is one that I think a lot of people in this pandemic life that we're leading right now can identify with, and that's rhythms for an exhausted life. Because in so many different ways, we're in that. And you write this in the book: aren't you tired of living at a pace that blurs out beauty, peace, and joy? Answer is yes.
Yep, I am.
Don't you want to be at home? The speed we live at does violence against our souls. The inner and outer distractions minimize the capacity for us to see God's activity around and within us. I sometimes imagine a scenario in which someone is locked inside of a supermarket and dies of starvation. Can you imagine? Well, you might say that this is impossible. Yet in our spiritual lives, this happens every day. Whether we know it or not, we are locked inside the supermarket of God's abundant life and love. It's all available to us. Even so, people are spiritually starving, but it does not have to be this way.
Love that.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this, especially in these times that we're living in right now.
Rob, when I wrote that, and that chapter in itself, the 2 chapters on contemplative rhythms, for me, serve as the foundation for the rest of the book. That to address matters of race and matters of interiority and matters of sexuality, matters of justice in the world, requires a life that slows down enough to be with God, so that we're speaking from a place of wisdom, a place of depth, a place of non-duality, a place of patience and contemplation. So, I live in the city that never sleeps. My existence is surrounded around by lots of noise, an ambulance. During the height of the pandemic, because where we're at on Queens Boulevard is one of the more well-traveled boulevards in all of Queens, I was hearing the sound of the ambulance sirens nonstop.
Wow.
The question I'm asking is, even in this particular context that we find ourselves in New York City, is there a space for contemplation and prayer? And I believe the answer is yes, as crazy as it may sound. And so contemplative rhythms, for me, writing about it, the reason why I am so passionate about it is I'm writing from this, not from mountains pristinely situated
Yeah.
or from a monastery. I visit a Trappist monastery every year in the Boston area,
Yeah.
but I'm writing from a place where people are running out of their homes to catch a train that they're late for work for, or the sounds of ambulances. But at the core of it is slowing down our lives to be with God. My life verse has become Psalm 27:4. Where David says, "One thing have I desired, and that what I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple."
Yeah.
And so our church has been profoundly shaped by monasticism, by the Desert Fathers and Mothers in that tradition. And for the last 20 years, when I first was introduced to the monastic tradition through a spiritual formation class in college, and a subsequent visit to the Franciscan monastery in upstate New York, I've just been enamored with this tradition and realized this is the foundation for the kind of spiritual life that we desperately long for.
Right. And it's that idea around having that time of contemplation or prayer or discernment, if you will, gives us the opportunity to be aware of what's being spoken to us or given to us, right? I think sometimes, we were talking to another guest we had was James Martin, and he was talking about he wrote a book about prayer and this idea that people say, well, nothing happens when I pray or when I contemplate, so there's nothing going on. But he really points to this idea that, but are you paying attention? And we need that, don't we? That's part of the rhythm in there, to be able to pay attention and hear what's going on.
Yeah. And for me, and I love James Martin, by the way, I saw you had him on. So glad to be on this platform there with him and with you guys here. When I think about prayer, I think the thrust of contemplative prayer and a life of contemplation is to move beyond transactionalism. And by transactionalism in prayer in particular, I'm getting at the notion that prayer is just a means to an end to get something, as opposed to prayer as a means of simply being with God for the sake of being with God. And there's certainly wonderful things that come out of that. But for me, the goal has been to move beyond transactionalism to communion. That's the essence of the contemplative life, which moves us to now being present with our neighbor, being present with ourselves, being present with the world.
Yeah, definitely. We know that there's so many racial tensions in America right now, and here in Canada as well. We got stuff going on as well in our country. Your context at New Life is incredibly diverse, as you mentioned, and you have argued that one of the values so critical for formation of the deep spiritual life is racial reconciliation. And so we really wanted to get into that a little bit, because reconciliation is also a big thing that's going on here in our country with our Indigenous brothers and sisters and such. And you write this: when the essence of the gospel is stripped down to the afterlife or to a glorious but strictly individual personal decision of faith, it's not what Jesus described as the good news about his kingdom. And predictably, there's no real urgency to see lives oriented toward a more loving and just way of being in the world. Our understanding of the gospel will be either Christ's kingdom catalyst for racial justice and reconciliation, or a conformity to this world's impetus for a fragmented and divided society. Surely the gospel is good news, but good news about what? And you write that it's my conviction that the gospel at its core is not merely the good news of a soteriological transaction, which is a fancy word that means getting saved. The gospel at its core is centrally about the story and victory of Jesus. The risen and enthroned Lord is our good news. And further, this gospel has specific purposes for the healing of the world. And one of the main purposes is the creation of a new family that transcends racial and ethnic barriers. Can you say a bit more about that, about maybe how our institutions prioritize whiteness? We certainly are becoming more and more aware of that, and the habits that you encourage us to cultivate to kind of go deeper and become the reconciling people that we need to be.
Yeah. When I think about reconciliation and justice along racial and ethnic lines, I begin first of all with how we define the gospel. And depending on how one defines the gospel will determine if it's a core matter or if it's an ancillary issue. When I ask people in the congregation that I pastor, what's your definition of the gospel? If I ask 20 people, I often get 15 to 20 different answers
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
on what it is.
Yeah.
And so I have tried to teach this one definition of the gospel, which I do believe is faithful to Paul in the New Testament, where the gospel is the good news that the kingdom of God has come near in Jesus Christ, and that through his life, death, resurrection, and enthronement, the powers of sin and death no longer have the last word. And that's what if that is the working definition of what the gospel is, then any power of sin and death that we find in the world must be now subjected to Christ and his kingdom. And so for me, talking about the gospel really is the starting point for addressing matters of racial justice and reconciliation. It's along those lines then that I address matters of whiteness. And if there are two terms, two words that I've had to define and redefine constantly, and I still get in trouble, is terms as it relating to what the gospel is and what racism is. What is the gospel and what is racism? And as a subset of racism, talking about whiteness, unless we're able to define terms in ways that are robust and comprehensive, we're going to have a hard time moving forward here. So for me, when I think about what is whiteness, what is white supremacy, my working definition, which is not in the book, is that white supremacy and whiteness is this noxious, insidious, and unconscious or conscious ways that white power, white experiences, white value, white aesthetics are prioritized, normalized, internalized, and institutionalized.
Wow. Okay.
But it's bang on. It's not in the book. It may not be in the book, but that is bang on.
It's not in the book. There's some bonus material right here.
All right. Yeah. Now listen, folks, listen up. You're getting extra here. Okay. No extra charge today, but Rich is doling out the gospel here, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how I've had to, but patiently, it's noxious, it's insidious, it's unconscious. What is, the ways that white experience, white perspectives, white values, white power is prioritized, normalized, internalized, institutionalized. And I think unless we are talking about it from that perspective, I'm not sure we're going to move beyond mudslinging and hyperreactivity, which is why I've discovered in the work for racial justice, in a context that's incredibly diverse. I mean, much of the pain that I've had as a pastor and the agony I've had in terms of conversations has emerged out of the context of race and racism. Right. So even though there's 75 nations represented, even though 123 languages spoken, at our church, there's four kinds of people. There's the conservative who doesn't think anything's wrong with our country and can't find anything wrong with our country. There's the progressive who can't find anything right with our country. Right. There's the immigrant who is just so grateful to be in this country. So they align very much so with the conservative, but from a different vantage point. And then there's the indifferent person who can we just focus on the gospel? When you get those people in a room, it can be very difficult, which is what I experienced very much so, especially in the past year. So I've recognized that we need clarity on content as well as clarity on contexts in order to move forward with this conversation. But gospel and white supremacy or whiteness are two terms that must be defined and redefined regularly.
Well, we had Robert P. Jones on here. I don't know if you saw his recent book, White Too Long, where he really talks about, the broad implications of white supremacy in the church. And I think that really has a overarching impact. And it's not just in America. I mean, we have it here in Canada as well. The issues are different. The context is different. But the reality about white supremacy is not different. In Canada, it's largely Indigenous people who've been discriminated against in the most powerful and profound ways, and the stealing of their land, and and we talk about reconciliation. We had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission here to sort of spent years hearing the stories and having those things told. But the struggle for me is the church has not yet grappled with this the way you're talking about race, in terms of having these really they're not easy conversations, but
No.
we need to have them. We have to acknowledge that we value, that we as a culture and as a church have valued white bodies over brown bodies. You know, that there's a reality in terms of how and we see it played out in the culture around us, whether it's through police violence or you know, healthcare. We're learning through COVID just how the discrepancies between people, Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, and what they're dealing with, up and against people who are white, and the privilege we have to. So there's a lot for the church to unpack. I mean, it really is not easy. I mean, we often, I think, and Ian's going to ask you a question about this, but we conflate diversity
Yeah.
with some sort of racial justice.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that is one of the biggest problems of multi-ethnic churches, in which we assume that because we have different people in the room, we are actually working towards matters of justice. For us, in our context, that just means what I say is, you know, we're called to be more than just a sanctified subway car. In New York City, you get a lot of people in close proximity who are different, but the church is to be much different than a subway car. And the goal is not diversity; it's solidarity, it's love, it's making things right. So that's absolutely right, Kevin.
Yeah. Ian, I don't know if you wanted to pick up on that. He was going to read that quote of yours.
Yeah, well, I could just read the quote anyway
Share it with folks anyway. Yeah,
for the listeners.
Yeah.
So you write, to be sure, diversity is a good thing, but in and of itself, it is not the same as reconciliation. On the surface, diversity looks wonderful, especially in church settings. However, as with justice, the temptation is for us to stop there. When we make diversity the end goal, we are no different from New York City subway cars. New York City subway cars are crowded of diverse, anonymous people in close proximity, but the church is called to be more than a sanctified subway car. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, what I've discovered is a multifaceted and multi-layered issue like racism requires a multi-level and solution. And so when I think about matters of race, I'm thinking about it at least on 6 levels to try to address it and the complexity of it. And those levels for me are theologically, historically, sociologically, politically, ecclesiologically, and formationally. And for me, unless we are having a conversation on all 6 of those levels,
right,
and that's not an exhaustive list, but those are the 6 that consistently come up for me, I don't know if we're going to make so much progress because we need all of those elements to work for a world that's marked by racial justice and reconciliation.
Well, where would be the best place to start those conversations and have those areas where we can have those, like the reconciliation that we all need?
Yeah, the way that I start in my context in Queens is that 6th aspect of it, of the formational aspect. Now, I write about spiritual formation. I'm writing about other things as well, but for me, I just don't want to live in theory. I want to live in the place where hearts are transformed, and a recognition that we're not just talking about transformed hearts, but transformed systems as well. But let's start somewhere. Where I start with people is I often help people or try to lead people to explore the ways that they have been profoundly shaped by their families of origin in this area. And so I borrow a lot from family systems theory in terms of the ways that we have been shaped, formed, malformed, deformed, whatever you want to say, by our families of origin and by our cultures to see the world in a particular way. And so there's a simple exercise that I lead people into that is so fundamentally simple, but so agonizingly difficult to do. And the question very simply is, how did your family shape you? What are the conscious or unconscious messages that your family of origin gave you about Black people, about Asian people, about Native people, about Hispanic people, about Middle Eastern people? And to actually name those messages, those scripts, those points of inferiority, for many, it's so difficult. And again, my context is very diverse.
Right.
And so to watch people from China and Korea have to write, this is what my family thought about Black people, or watch Hispanic people from Puerto Rico or wherever say, this is how I have learned to think about Asian people. Unless we're beginning to name those scripts and messages and doing the work of now submitting that to the transforming power of the gospel and ourselves to that, we're going to have a hard time just moving forward in the most simple way. So for me, it's about how have we been shaped? Can we begin to explore that and replace those scripts with something more beautiful and more just?
You have a very good question that you ask in context with that. And the question that you ask is, who are you not allowed to marry?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that what it's?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So who is it not okay for you to marry in your family? Is that right,
Yeah.
Rich? Is that the way?
Who can't your child marry?
That's right. Who can't your child marry? Thank you.
You
Yeah.
know, and we
Yeah.
might not say it out loud, but there's some stuff deep in our bones where if we see someone who looks a certain way, we're going, oh, this is not my first choice or second choice or third choice.
Yeah.
Which is why, I mean, I begin one of the chapters with one of my professors saying, the question is of Christianity and the gospel is not, can I be your brother in Christ? The question is, can I be your brother-in-law?
Right.
That's one of the foundational questions about racial justice and reconciliation.
Yes. Fantastic.
That's good stuff. Yeah.
Thinking about self-examination, because the other thing that you just listed all those levels of how you interact with race, right? The one that I didn't hear you say, but I'm curious about in a way, and maybe it'll lead into this self-examination is personal. I mean, as a racialized American yourself, there's a personal relationship. You've had to experience your own stuff. You talk about in the book in that chapter about self-examination. I really loved it. It really, and again, I can tell that you've been heavily influenced by the Desert Fathers and Mothers and all that stuff. But I really love the quote that you started the chapter with. It says, "For centuries, people have extolled the virtue of self-examination. Socrates said, 'The unexamined life is not worth living.' St. Augustine wrote, 'Oh God, let me know myself. Let me know you.' Ice Cube said, 'You better check yourself before you wreck yourself.'" Like I said, writes Rich, for centuries we've been doing this. That's some really great suggestions right there for what we should do in terms of examination. You're right. Removing the logs from our own eyes that we may see the specks of dust in our neighbor's eyes. See Matthew 7, verse 5, or Luke 6, 42. The world is in desperate need of people willing to examine their own selves before examining others. The work of other examination comes too naturally. We are accustomed to viewing, judging, and comparing others rather than ourselves. That's easy. The way of self-examination is hard, but by God's grace, the Spirit can help us. We do need to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, brother. So share with our listeners how those examinations, what they look like.
Well, first of all, when's the last time you've seen Ice Cube and St. Augustine? In one
I have
hour?
never. It's I just lit up. I lit up like a runway when I can't wait to say I can't wait to be as white as possible and try and say check yourself before you wreck yourself and sound like the whitest podcaster possible trying to quote Ice Cube.
Well, I mean, it speaks to my love for hip hop. I grew up being a rapper, and my father, no lie, was a DJ as a part-time job, and so I was longing for a time to include my love for hip hop.
Well, you hit it, man.
So there you go. In terms of those two chapters on interior examination, are actually my favorite chapters to write about. I enjoyed everything else, but for me, I guess the season I was writing it in, I was experiencing lots of internal breakthrough and freedom by doing this. Now, at the core of interior examination for me is this theological affirmation that Jesus Christ wants to transform every facet of our being, and not just our behaviors, not just the way we see the world, but everything inside of us as well. I often hear folks who are skeptical of this kind of stuff that, are we talking about navel gazing? Are we talking about, we shouldn't just be focusing on God and not on ourselves, and use all kinds of language to avoid ourselves, which as my predecessor Pete wrote, and as I add to, we often use God to run from God, and use God to run from ourselves. And so I believe that Christ wants to transform every facet of our being, which includes our interior world. Now, moving in that direction requires a level of self-confrontation, but self-compassion as well. And that's the dynamic tension we need to hold on to, that we're not just looking within for the sake of condemning ourselves or excusing ourselves, which we're trying to live in reality as well as live very compassionately. And so for me, that works itself out in a couple of ways. Number one, it is lifting mind and heart to God as it pertains to the various emotional states that I find myself in a given day or in a given week.
Mhm.
And so, how do I incorporate my anger? How do I incorporate my grief? How do I incorporate my anxiety and my joy into moments of prayer and communion with God, as opposed to waiting for those moments when I feel holy enough to pray and lift? Ron Rolheiser, one of my favorite authors, he would write about
Canadian.
this. That's it. That's right. I hear the accent all the time.
Yeah.
And Rolheiser would talk about, every thought is an opportunity to lift up mind and heart to God in prayer. And so if you're angry, pray your angry. If you're lustful, pray your lust. If you're anxious, pray your anxiety. And so in order to do that requires a level of internal curiosity, self-compassion, and confrontation. But that's at its core what I'm trying to do here with interior examination: lift up mind and heart to God.
Right, right. Want to shift a bit and get into a little bit of mission, because I think that was a really important part of what you were doing in your writings as well, and discussing a bit about mission. And you talk a bit about a story that you had about a year or so after you became a Christian. You said you went to this temp agency to find some work before you went to college, and that first job you said was your mission field. Can you share a little bit about that story and that job with our listeners?
Well, you have to understand, when I became a Christian in a Latino Spanish-speaking Pentecostal church in Brooklyn, New York, and I was on fire for God. Again, 15 family members came to Christ on one night, August
Yeah.
1999. And I was on fire for God. I was preaching on the streets, organizing street services. So I was very zealous. And then I got a job working in Manhattan on Union Square for a small publishing company. And I thought it was my job to, do the job that they called me to do. But my first job was to convert everyone as quickly as I possibly could. And I knew it was a temp job, so I probably only had 2 months before I was going to.
Gotta go fast.
Yeah, let's go, folks.
So, I mean, I'm putting on the screensavers, Romans 3:20, all have fallen and sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And the biggest font that I could possibly find, so that when people come into my cubicle, they would sense the presence of God and ask, how can I become a Christian like you? Never happened that way.
Strange that.
Very strange. But Rob, I just found myself very zealous to convert as many people as I possibly could, which led to lots of very strange and challenging conversations. I'm shocked they didn't fire me within a couple of weeks. But that was essentially the way that I thought being missional, what it meant to be missional in the world.
And when the boss shut you down with the screen, what'd you do next?
Well, here I am. I'm 20 years old.
Right, you didn't give up.
I did not give up. She said, that's offensive. You got to take down these Bible verses off your screen. And because I was a Christian, a new Christian, I had so many Christian t-shirts within the first 6 months of my life. And so I just wore like a t-shirt with many different Bible verses on it to work the next day, knowing that she couldn't tell me to take off my shirt. So that's what you call zeal without
big time. Yeah. So anyway, that's a great story. But in discussing mission, you go on to write, I want to share a little bit again with our listeners. You write, when we see people with a Make America Great Again hat, not a t-shirt, but there are those out there as well.
Yeah.
We can see them from a posture of God's commitment toward them, or from the perspective of our own boundary making. When we see a woman of color with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, we can see her through the lens of God's heart of mercy toward her, or reduce her entire humanity to a hashtag. When we see an immigrant, we can see them through the eyes of God's tender love, or through the lens of fearful scapegoating. To affirm that God is for us is to confess with clarity who is us. If by us we mean fellow Christians, especially those who believe as we do, then that us is much too confined. The us that God is for always extends to all people and to the entirety of creation. So, can you say a little bit more about, hospitality, patience, justice, all that needs to be cultivated to embrace that vision of a God who extends toward all of us?
Yeah, I write from a particular context, not just from my own theological extrapolations. I'm
Mm,
writing from a flesh and blood community that has people who wear "Make America Again Great Again" hats,
right.
people who are first generation immigrants, people who do come to church with a Black Lives Matter T-shirt, and often they are sitting unbeknownst to each other on the same row.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
They knew that they'd probably move their chair.
Yeah.
And so I write, I know of the human tendency, because it's in me,
Yes.
to reduce people
Yeah.
to their vote, to reduce people
Right.
to a slogan. The temptation is very much real in me.
Mhm.
And then I know, meeting with these people, that the reason why they might see the world the way they do. And so the challenge of my context is, I mean, there's lots of very challenging moments in conversations. The gift of it is I'm able to see people in non-dualistic black or white, either or ways.
Right.
And if that's the case, then my task as a follower of Jesus is to embody what Jesus embodied, namely acts of hospitality and welcome, namely acts of justice and compassion and tenderness. And so for me, and I say this as a fellow sinner on the journey, trying to figure this out, because there are moments when I might offer hospitality, but internally I'm withdrawing my heart. And as Henry Nouwen would write, hospitality is not just about opening your home, but opening your heart to someone.
Right.
And so I recognize all these challenges, and yet at the same time, I'm called to follow in the way of Jesus. Dallas Willard talks about Christ didn't die on the cross so you didn't have to. He died on the cross so you could join him.
Right.
And if I believe that's the essence of what the gospel is, joining Jesus in this way, then I'm called to move beyond the boundary making, dualistic, either or, in or out ways that we
Mhm.
tend to view the world,
Right.
which is very painful and very difficult.
It's
Yeah.
very painful. I think of Daniel Berrigan, Father Daniel Berrigan, who said, if you're going to follow Jesus, you better look good on wood,
Yes, that's exactly right.
right? Because it's
Yeah.
going to hurt.
I first heard that from Ron Rollheiser,
Yes.
but that's exactly right. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just having a discussion with someone about this type of thing recently. And, we were coming to that understanding that they were coming to a new understanding about themselves too, about that, if we're staying in understanding that we're all made in the image of God, then our sin is not so much, all these things we do. Sin is kind of pushing away from seeing each other's humanity, because
Mm,
they're also made in the image of God.
yeah.
And when we're caught in that, and like you say, we start to compartmentalize or politicize this, then that's our sin,
Hmm.
right? And we need to be aware of that. And
Hmm.
so it was a good conversation we had, and I'm so happy to be able to hear you at this part of it as well, because it just ties together like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good. That's good. All right, Rich, we're coming to the end of our time, but we do want to tell everybody that the book is out now, The Deeply Formed Life, and we hope that you have an opportunity to pick it up. I don't know if there's anything else maybe you're working on or anything coming down in the next little while that people might be
You
keeping an eye out.
cooking another one, Rich?
I am cooking another one, and part of it is, people see on the outside the beauty of our congregation. I see on the inside the difficulty of it, and so
Oh yeah, yeah.
and so I'm writing a book right now, trying to. We don't have the full title yet, but at its core, it's about becoming whole in a fractured world,
Mm.
and how do we do that personally and interpersonally, and in many ways institutionally. And so I'm writing about a number of topics that are not necessarily held together, like trauma and powers and principalities
Mm.
and humility and contemplation. But hopefully that'll be out in 2022. I'm about
Mhm.
15 to 20% through it right now. So
Oh,
Wow.
well, we
Wow.
better get cracking there, buddy. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
but I think about your context and all that diversity, and I mean, sounds like what you're pulling together there is really critical work, actually, because
Mhm.
I get the impression that if you live near New Life, you probably you could be one of the people who's trying to escape something else
Mm,
and go to this place that sounds like a nirvana to you.
yes.
Like I'd imagine you have some of that. And usually with that, at least the way, I mean, I'm much smaller way here, but Rob and I know from being in halfways healthy congregations that people who are in less healthy congregations sometimes pick up their lawn chair and come over to us, which everybody goes, oh, you do. Well, all we're really doing is moving pieces around on a chessboard, mind you. But when they get here, they're bringing a lot with them because
Yeah.
they're running away from something. So I'd imagine there's a bit of that.
Oh, tons of that. I mean, we have folks who were part of monocultural, monoethnic congregations that for them became too stale. So they come to New Life because you have 75 nations represented, but they love diversity, but they don't want to talk about justice.
Right.
And so they go, I thought we're not supposed to see color in this church
We're
here.
colorblind, right?
We're
Yeah,
colorblind. So there's
yeah.
plenty of that. And
Yeah.
then there's plenty of the folks who feel they were burned out or they did too much. And now they hear that we talk about Sabbath keeping and rhythms. And so, hey,
Yeah.
we're going to go to your church because
Yeah.
we don't have to do
Yeah.
anything in your church.
Right.
And then I go,
right.
well, you get one Sabbath a week.
That's right.
And we
That's
get
right.
that on a regular basis.
Well, what a wonderful, unique context of ministry that you're in. And if this pandemic madness ever ends and we get a chance to get down to New York, we got to
Yeah, we'll be in there,
definitely
man.
slip into the back pew and
We'll be in
check
there.
you guys out. We love to be part of that. So, hey, Rich, thanks so much. Thanks for your ministry, for your writing, for your opportunity to open our eyes to a few things today, and for our listeners as well, I'm sure today. And we wish you all the best. God bless, and keep in touch. We'd love to chat with you again down the road, maybe when that next book comes out too. Okay.
Thank you so much for the time.
And thank you for tying together Socrates and Ice Cube. It's the best.
Thank you. I
All
got
right.
something to talk to my kids about now after. Our
Bless you, Rich. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks again to Rich Velotis for spending some time with us today. And we want you to check out that book, The Deeply Formed Life.
I feel excited
And,
because I
guys,
watched
that's
so
it for
much-
us until
Rob, hang on a second. I feel very excited because we always we're all into the Seinfeld here, right?
Yeah.
And I just feel excited that the guy we had on was here from Queens. Like, they always end up going to Queens. on
Yeah.
the-
I mean, how did we miss that? Right.
Well, I
Yeah.
know, but
Yeah,
I'm just
how did we
excited
not
we had a
ask
guy
him
from Queens.
if he knows Kramer from Queens? Yeah. You ever eaten that diner?
Does-
Because that's an actual diner that they used to.
Is it really? So
Go
may,
in, yeah,
maybe
you could
Kramer
go,
goes to the
yeah.
church. Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? It's a pretty diverse
Wow.
place. All right. Thanks again to our sponsors on the Vickers Crossing, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated, to Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved, and to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. So that's it for us. Have a good rest of the week, everybody. We'll chat again next week. We got a couple of podcasts coming up, including Diana Butler Bass is going to be back on the program, and she's got a new book hitting the bookstores on March the 30th. Is it?
March the 30th, and this is a
so we're gonna
bonus
have her on
uh,
that day. Yeah.
book launch episode. This is Diana
Mhm.
is being with us on the day of her book launch. You're going to get to hear her talk about that book. It doesn't get bigger than this, folks.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So we'll look forward to that. Take care, guys. Be safe. And until we get together again, my name is Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's.
Kevin George, St. Aidan's.
And my name is Ian.
And remember, Kevin, to always look both ways.
Before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!